Hey, how you doing? Anthony Ferraro here of Great Sci-Fi. Today we're going to do a blaster. I mentioned that I've been working on a no-budget sci-fi that's not my own. I've been doing props and costumes for a very small production. And a few weeks ago, I made this beautiful beast, right? So we have this helmet now. Now to complete this character, I'm going to do armor, but also we're going to need a weapon. So I have a few Nerf blaster type things that were donated to me. I have this piece of PVC pipe. You know, I have this scope left over from a Boba Fett. I got the styrene plastic. Lots of that. So since it's no budget, so this is all stuff I have laying around, and I'm going to put together a prop. That's the coffee brewing over there. Get ready to dive in. Now, so these guns were donated to me a long time ago, and this brings up a point. So I make sci-fi stuff all the time, right? So I have sci-fi costumes, I have guns, I have props. I just keep them on hand. But for a lot of people, like yourself perhaps, maybe you're just going to do one production, right, in that genre. So what happens is you have all this stuff afterwards, and a lot more when you're doing a genre piece. You have a lot of little hand props and things. And sometimes on a budget, it's actually less expensive to just buy cheap guns and props rather than rent them, right, or have them built. And so people know that I do this, and you know, I always have my ear to the ground, if you will, and so I had these donated to me. Somebody was like, oh hey, you know, I know Anthony does this stuff, and they gave me a whole bag of these. So that's one point. The second point I want to make is that, okay, let's look at what they did. So if you watch my channel, basically what they did is they bought Nerf guns and they just spray painted them black, and that's fine. But you know, I'll link to a video here. In my channels, all we would have done is we would have taken maybe, I don't know, 20 more minutes. We would have taken our $4 of metallic craft paint, a dry brush, right? And with about this much effort. That's about it, right? And these would have looked so much better. So hopefully things like that are helping you, learning stuff like that on the channel. But anyway, I digress. So I know that this is going to be the main piece. I'm thinking maybe cut this off, extend it. I have this for extra parts if I need it. I'm going to make it match, like I said, this mask. So there's probably going to be some kind of V shape that matches that. But yeah, let's get started. All right, so let's dive in. So first thing I do is get out my buzzsaw Dremel tool, my favorite one. All right, first thing I'm gonna do is cut off the tip off of here. This for sure I'm going to use once I extend the barrel. That's just got a cool look, and I just test with that. It's a little bit loose, but we'll sort that out later. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take out all these screws. We're going to take this apart. I just like to get rid of like all the electronics and any other things that are sort of in the way, just because we're not going to be using this as an actual Nerf gun. And I see what things I can salvage. All the time when you go to take these things apart, there's always some mystery screw. But finally I get it apart. And so I'm going to start to gut this out. Sometimes I leave everything in there, but in this case, I know I'm going to want to try to put the PVC barrel deep into this gun so that it has some stability. So I'm messing around. Then that's the battery case. I realize I need to keep that in there, otherwise there'll be a hole on the other side. I don't feel like dealing with that. And this I might use later, but for sure it'll get used in another piece. So now I'm just trying to figure out where this PVC pipe is going to go. Round peg, square hole. I always say that. I want to make sure that it goes deep into the gun because the PVC pipe is heavy, right? So you don't want to hang the pipe off of this little plastic piece, you want to hang the plastic piece off of the PVC pipe. So now I'm just test fitting, and it's just a matter of massaging this in here. So I'm testing this now, and I realize there's one little corner and a piece of plastic from a part that I took out, and I'll have to remove that. And you're just massaging this. And then now I'm just roughly inserting that in there and thinking, okay, this is how this is going to want to go. Let's make it happen. We will make it happen. So now I'm just making sure that everything fits a little more snugly, and I'm cleaning up all my rough cuts that I made with the buzzsaw tool. And yeah, that looks good. So now we're just working it in, right? It's step by step, inch by inch. So now what I'm gonna do is take out this one last tab here. This seems to be the last thing that's holding me up. And, it's just a process. So those tabs, I'm gonna lose the screws to those, but, we'll end up gluing it and putting back in whatever screws we can salvage. And here I'm just getting rid of the last little bits and bobs. So now I'm gonna put a mark on the PVC pipe. And to make this fit, what I'm gonna have to do is this end that's going to go inside the gun takes up a lot of space. So what I can do is heat this up with the heat gun. We use the heat gun a lot in these builds. And make sure you wear a respirator. You can't see me obviously because I'm off camera, but when you're working with plastics and heating things up, you just want to use a respirator. So now I just have this 25-pound dumbbell, and I'm just using this to help me flatten. You could probably use something a little better than a dumbbell, but it's the heaviest thing I had. So now I'm just working this piece so that it'll fit. So we flatten that. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 screws in here, and I want this to be hardy. Like lots of times we glue things with hot glue, but this we want to bolt, right? So again, I'll reiterate. So we're hanging the handle off of the pipe. The pipe is the main core piece. So we want to make sure that that's stable. And if we put 2 bolts in it and we just bolt it through, it's not going to go anywhere. So now I'm just widening up these holes because I have a couple pretty decent sized bolts. And the idea is that I'm going to put the bolts straight through the gun, through the pipe, and then that way I think they'll go good with the rest of the piece, just because it kind of has that look anyway, right? So sometimes the hardware will add a little visual interest, and I think, once it's all painted and blended together, you won't notice those pieces of hardware anyway. They'll feel like they're part of the whole piece. And I'm going to tighten these up, and actually I'm going to use a wrench on this just because I want to make sure that it's not going anywhere. And it's actually nice, hot glue and super glue a lot, like using nuts and bolts is a really fun thing to do. All right, so now I'm just going to super glue the whole perimeter of this, of the gun case, just to make sure that it all sets together, because a lot of those screws are missing now, right? Because we ground off the part that receives the screw. So now, again, because we're, force fitting this top piece doesn't want to close. So I'm going to take this opportunity, because we have this nut and bolt look going. So I'm just going to drill a hole right through there, and I'm going to bolt that together. And actually that ends up being really, really stable. And again, if I had just used hot glue, it would have been not so sturdy. And now, that looks good. It actually blends in with the piece, and I give it a little balance test there, and it feels tight. So now I just have these gaps from where I cut out screws and got rid of pieces. So I'm just going to use some scrap pieces of foam here. This diamond patterned foam I'm going to use on the barrel, and I'm going to use it to put some embellishments on the other piece. So this will blend in nicely, and I'm just going to tuck that in there, and that's going to force fit in there. I do tend to overbuild things, so I'll put a little bit of glue in there. And remember, the beginning of this build, we're trying to match that helmet. So this diamond pattern foam actually will tie it to that helmet piece. And yeah, I'm happy with that. And I think I do it off camera, but I end up putting some super glue in there. And now I just have these leftover pieces and I'm just using them as greeblies. So I'm repurposing pieces from this actual gun to be the greeblies. So now I'm going to take some Bondo and we're going to fill up those screw holes, and then there's some places where I cut out the plastic just to make the handle bigger. So now we're just going to add the kicker, and you want to make sure you stir that up good so that it's all one solid color. And you want to try to use as little as possible. Once the Bondo hardens up, if you have these big heaps of Bondo on there, it's kind of a pain to sand them off. But what ends up happening is, you can see there by the trigger, you got that big clump in there. That's not good. We can fix that. But I used a little too much kicker, and so I had to do that in a hurry, and that was the last place that I had to put Bondo. But what I do is I take this file and I just hog out a lot of this Bondo before we fine sand it, and it's okay. But ideally you don't want to do it this way, but I figured I'd leave that in there just to show you that, you know, sometimes it doesn't go as planned. But now it's fine. So generally what I do is I'll hog out the excess Bondo with a file, and then I'll take a sanding stick, and then I'll get the sort of rounded and the strange shapes, and then I go with like a 220 grit sandpaper, and that's how I do my final sanding. And you know, you just sort of massage it and smooth it all over. So now I'm going to take some isopropyl alcohol, and I like to clean it up with this because this just evaporates, whereas water, you could end up getting some strange pools of water somewhere that'll screw up your paint and your glue. So this is just a quick way to clean this up. So now I'm going to hit this all with this primer. This primer is just helpful because with the filler primer, now I get to see where my spots are that are going to need some help. So you just take the Bondo glazing putty, and this is just meant for shallow cracks and pit holes and you know, scratches. So I just lightly go through and put a thin coat wherever there's a little pock mark or a little dot or screw hole that I missed. And yeah, you know, it's kind of all over the place there, but most of that will get sanded off. So now we got to trim down this pipe. So now I'm just sort of feeling where my hand wants to go, and you know, just eyeballing it. So now I'm going to cut off the PVC pipe here. I use a piece of tape because when I cut this by hand, I don't know about you, but when I saw, like, I tend to wander. You know, ideally in the shop, I would just have some kind of jigsaw or bandsaw or table saw. But, you know, I'm doing this by hand. And so now I'm just smoothing up the edges with my Dremel tool, just because, you know, with that hacksaw, you get a little bit of a ragged edge, but it's fine. And now it's starting to take shape, and that's really firm, you know. Actually feels great in the hand. So now I'm going to cut off another piece, and that's going to be the hand grip in the front of the barrel, you know, sort of like a shotgun pump inspired look. And so I'm just going to, you know, use a piece of the pipe. I find the center, and I find with things, when you're gluing things down, it's always easy to give yourself some guidelines. And right here, I'm just toothing up, just roughing up this area so the glue has something to bite into. Especially when you're gluing to plastics, it's usually pretty slick. So you want to give it an area so that it can grab. And now, because I put down those pen marks, once the glue is setting, instead of sliding everything around, you have something to aim for, and yeah, that's exactly where I wanted that. So now I'm going to put this heat shield on here, and also what I want to do with this part of the gun is I want this to sort of reflect the helmet, right? So that's what's going to make this a set piece. The helmet has sort of that V theme. That's kind of the main thing that jumps out at you stylistically, design-wise. So I want to repeat that onto this blaster. So I'm going to do that here with this sort of heat shield that I'm going to put over the top of this. And so I'm just cutting out a paper pattern here before I go to the styrene plastic. And now I'm tracing this pattern onto the plastic. And the reason you want to do this is because once you cut the plastic, you don't want to have to be making adjustments to that. You want to make the adjustments to the paper pattern. I mean, I think that makes sense. And the styrene, you know, we've used that a few times here now. You know, you just score it with the knife and it snaps right off. So now I'm just test fitting this on the top of the barrel, and that's looking promising. Everything's the right shape. And now I'm going to heat it up with the heat gun. Again, got the respirator on, and I have this piece of scrap pipe just to give me a guideline of how I want to bend this. And basically you just heat it up and you shape it by hand. Just be careful not to overheat it. And the centerpiece that I'm going to remove, I did the same thing when I did the face shield of the helmet. I scored about half of it, but not the full length. So this way when I bend it, the front and back aren't all bent in a different way. It's bent uniformly, and then I'll snap out that centerpiece once it's all set to the shape that I want. So now I just do a final test before I'm going to break out that centerpiece, and that feels right. So now to get into these centerpieces, basically you just cut a little hole to access it, and once you get one little piece off, then the whole thing goes pretty easily. So now I just snap out that centerpiece, and you see now my bends at the front and back are they're in sync, right? All right, so now while I was doing that, the spot putty was drying. And now I got a 320 grit sandpaper here actually, and I'm just doing the final little bit of sanding and feathering this all together. This is sort of last looks, and yeah, that feels good. Usually, you know, when I do these pieces, there's a rough spot or two, but because this is going to be weathered anyway, I'm not going to have any glaring problems in there. And now moving on to the foam. Now this is going to be the foam insert for the heat shield. And like I said, this is going to mirror the helmet. And instead of just a big flat piece of plastic, this is just going to give it a little more visual interest, right? And this diamond pattern really plays nicely when we paint it. So now, again, we're going to heat with the EVA foam. You just heat it and you can bend it into any shape you want. And also what this does is it really solidifies that heat shield piece and makes it a little more substantial. So I test fit that, and now I think everything's working pretty good. I'm just going to have to trim that up a little, but yeah, it's starting to look like something. It's getting exciting. So now I'm just going to take some hot glue, and I'm going to hot glue the EVA foam into our heat shield. I mean, I don't know, I'm calling it heat shield for the first time, I guess. It is now forever the heat shield. And yeah, you know, it's, you know, like smell-o-vision, like feel-vision. I wish you could feel that. It feels good. All right, so now for this pump handle, I have some 8mm craft foam. And what I want to do is I just want to cover the handle in foam. And here I'm making some guidelines. And instead of just having a flat piece of foam, what I'm doing here is I'm taking my wood burning tool, and I'm just putting a texture, very simple texture, on the foam. So now with hot glue, I'm just going to place this on the hand grip up here, and boom, there it is. And this I'm actually going to not paint. I like it's got that grippy feel to it. So I hot glue that in there, and off camera I made the front and back tabs. And yeah, so now this nozzle piece is just a tiny bit too big, right? Square peg, round hole. This case, it's a round hole into a bigger round hole. So I just got a little piece of craft foam here that I'm going to super glue onto the barrel, and that's an easy fix. And then so that it'll give us sort of the right diameter for that nozzle to fit properly. So I hot glue that on there. Yeah, and I think this really sells it, that nozzle piece, right? So it's starting to look like a heavy gun now, big blaster. Okay, so now I'm going to commit to the heat shield. More hot glue. So now I'm just pressing that in there, and one last look. And I think, yeah, that's working. All right, so now I'm going to hit this with some black primer, which is also going to be our base coat. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to put some basic alien text on here, just to add a subtle little detail that you might notice or might not. It's just nice to have this on there. And all I'm doing is taking a piece of painter's tape and I'm just making up glyphs, alien letters, I don't know. And what I do is I cut these out with a razor blade, and then you carefully remove the painter's tape. Always a piece is going to get left behind, and what we'll do is, you know, as long as we can get 90% of it, we can fix it once we lay it down. So now I put this on the side of the blaster, and you just carefully want to tack it down. And again, you know, if something got messed up when you're pulling it up, you just make a little piece of tape patch and it's fine. So Bill Duran over at Punished Props has the great tip. You hit this with clear coat. So this way, with the clear coat, it doesn't, when you paint it the color, we got the silver there, it won't bleed underneath the tape. So now I'm taking off the tape, and you know, this really pops out, but I'm going to knock it down. So what I'm going to do now is just mist a little bit of the black primer over that. Once that's dry, we're going to take this really fine steel wool, and we're just going to rub that off, and that's going to make it look like this lettering has been on this gun for the life of it. And then once, you know, we're going to weather and paint on top of that, so that's just a good starting place. So now I'm looking at the gun, and I put off camera this piece on the front of the barrel there just because there was a gap there, and the last minute I didn't film it. I just put that piece of foam on there. So now I'm going to take some metallic paint, and we're just going to do a dry brushing, a light brushing. So what you do is just put a tiny bit of paint on the brush, wipe most of it off, and you just lightly kiss the whole piece, and you just start brushing and brushing and brushing really lightly, like almost like you're feather dusting it with paint. And I do this, so there's a lot of examples of me doing this on this channel. And, you know, you just sort of, the trick is to stop. You don't want to go overboard. And I always check it in the light and the camera, and yeah, that's looking like a blaster. And see how that text now is part of the gun? You know, you don't want it to pop out. So now we're going to do our weathering pass, and you know, when I have black based pieces, I like to go primarily with a brown for the weathering. So I got this sienna brown, and we're just going to add a little black, you know, to simulate grease. And I'm going to mix that up into a little bit of paint mud, and you put that in water and you just slather that on. I cover the whole thing because I'm going for the happy accidents, and then you're going to take a paper towel and you pat it dry. And what happens is, you know, my hands start getting messy, and for me that works. You know, I start handling it, paint gets in places, and then I try to get rid of all the paint, and ultimately I can't, and then now I have my weathering, and this also dampens the whole piece. It sort of mats it and ties it all together. We just want to seal that in now with some clear coat. And here's the final piece. I'm really happy with how bulky this comes across. And I think that this piece was very successful in riffing off the helmet. And once props and costumes start communicating with each other, you end up with a really powerful character. And let's take one last look. Yeah, that works for me. Man, that can't even fit in the frame. And it's just got, it's got a nice feel. And you know, the whole thing is centered around that pipe, right? So this is just super sturdy, which was really important to me. You know, you can't really convey that in video, but you know, sometimes with these props, you know, you don't want to be afraid that they're going to fall apart, and this is just really hardy. And I think we were successful, right? So here's the helmet. Oh man, these are so big. And that's the gun. Yeah. I think that worked out well. All right, well, the only thing left to do now is to fire it up All right, let's get 8082 in here.
You fools, you've armed me. Behold the ABD, the atomic blaster disaster. Tremble in fear as I demonstrate its power. You were foolish enough to bring me back, so be sure to subscribe, leave a comment. The fool loves to read the comments, and be sure to sign up for the email newsletter. And remember, we're all just here to help you make sci-fi.